So as India takes strides towards the future, some nations are turning the clock back, like Zimbabwe. It has reintroduced gold as a currency. That's right, Zimbabwe has launched new digital tokens. They are backed by gold. It's a move to replace Zimbabwe's actual currency. It's called the Zimbabwe dollar. What explains this move? To answer that, I must tell you about Zimbabwe's economy. It's in a bad shape, and that's an understatement. Inflation has shot through the roof. In December 2022, inflation touched a whopping 280%. It's not inflation anymore. It's what economists call hyperinflation. The Zimbabwe dollar is in trouble. It lost more than half of its value during 2022. You needed 2,200 Zimbabwe dollar for $1 US. 2,200 Zimbabwe dollars for $1 US. Now the currency has stabilized a bit, but it's yet to make a full recovery. What's the exchange rate now? About 360 Zimbabwe dollars for $1 US. The government is trying to contain the fall, hence the switch to gold. In July last year, physical gold coins were pushed into the market. They were made available as currency. People could buy them using the Zimbabwe dollar. And now Zimbabwe has introduced digital gold. It works just like the physical gold scheme. You can buy them using the money you have. But why switch to gold? Zimbabwe says this will help in stabilizing the currency. How? By cooling the demand for the US dollar in the country. You see, when the crisis began, people started exchanging the local currency for the US dollar. That's because the dollar, the US dollar, had more value. Now the government wants gold to replace the US dollar and contain the crisis. It's an ambitious experiment. Experts are not sure it will work, though. Although Zimbabwe is not the only country toying with this idea, in recent years, many countries have adopted digital currencies, and that too in different forms. But few have managed to take off. Take the case of El Salvador. In 2021, it recognized Bitcoin as legal tender. It was the first country to do so. El Salvador's central bank put Bitcoin in its reserves. Citizens were allowed to pay taxes in Bitcoin. Businesses were asked to accept Bitcoin as payment. Why did El Salvador turn to Bitcoin? Because of its economic situation. Its public debt had crossed 100% of its GDP. The US dollar was the official currency of El Salvador, but it was unable to borrow using the dollar. So it turned to Bitcoin. Today, it accepts both the US dollar and Bitcoin. Now, initially, the move caught the world's attention, but the experiment has not really delivered. In fact, the switch to Bitcoin has proved to be costly for this country. El Salvador spent $375 million on the Bitcoin project. As of last year, the country had lost $60 million on this bet, primarily due to low adoption, meaning not many people made the switch, and also because of the fluctuating value of Bitcoin. So that's the El Salvador story. Elsewhere, there are more experiments happening. Central banks around the world are mulling their own digital currency, like Sweden, like China, Norway, Japan. They're all exploring options. In fact, a total of 114 countries are exploring the idea. They represent 95% of the world's GDP. So far, 11 countries have launched a digital currency. This list includes India too. In December last year, India had launched a pilot project for the rupee. But this is fundamentally different from what Zimbabwe is doing, from Zimbabwe's monetary experiment. Because most central banks are not using gold or Bitcoin, they're building their own digital currency. And these are linked to their official currencies, not to other assets. And why is this difference significant? Let me explain. Prices of gold or Bitcoin are determined by the market. But a central bank digital currency is issued and operated by the state. So it tends to be more stable. It's less vulnerable to external shocks. Now, these are mostly experiments, but they're worth documenting because one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Digital money is the future of currency. Governments must explore. But they must also remember that only robust mechanisms will survive. El Salvador tried the Bitcoin, it failed. Zimbabwe is turning to digital gold, it may not work. These are, at best, stopgap arrangements. They fail to address the real problems in these economies, the problems of inflation and debt.